Hi, I'm John Persson. Welcome on board.
So, first of all, let me ask, is it John or Jon?
Jon.
Jon,
Jon
okay.
works. But it could also be John.
I bet the Americans didn't learn it in
there it's John. So.
Yeah, I've always thought it's funny when like James Bond is everywhere else, he's James Bond, but in Sweden he's James Bond.
James.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Okay, but hey, a few words. Who are you and what are you doing here?
My name is John Persson, and I am here to play for SaiPa.
If we can go through your career a bit, you're born in Sweden, and was it in Östersund or?
Yes, I was born in Östersund. We lived there until I was 2.
Yeah.
And then I we moved to Huddinge outside of Stockholm.
Okay. Yeah.
And we were there until I was 6, and then we moved to Mora.
Mora, yes.
So it was kind of in Mora where I grew up and started playing for real.
Okay. And then, am I right that you were 17 when you left to Canada?
Yeah, that is correct. So I was in Mora from when I was 6 until I was 17.
Yeah.
And then I decided to go over to Canada and play for Red Deer Rebels in the WHL.
What made you do that decision such a young age?
My brother actually played in the Quebec Major Hockey League.
Okay.
So also in the Canadian Juniors. So when he's 8 years older than me. So when he went and did that, it kind of became a dream for me to do that as well.
Okay. Is he still playing somewhere?
He does, but only almost for a little bit for fun now.
Okay. It should be fun still.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 3 years in Red Deer, and you get also picked in NHL draft, 5th round picked to New York Islanders.
Yeah, that's true. So my first year was, your first year there, you're a little homesick and all that stuff. But then my second year, I had a really good year, and I was fortunate enough to be drafted by the New York Islanders.
Yeah.
And then I decided to stay one more year in juniors to learn and grow.
Yes.
And then the year after that, I went to play for that organization for the New York Islanders farm team, which is Bridgeport Sound Tigers.
Yes, in Connecticut.
Yeah, that is true. So I was there for 3 years in total in Bridgeport.
And how was that time? 3 years.
It was you learned a lot for sure, and it's your first 3 years playing professional. It's different than junior hockey, obviously. So I learned a lot in those 3 years for sure.
You even had a chance to catch up the NHL dream. You played for 10 games, or tell me something about that.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to get called up to the NHL and play 10 games my second year there. So that was a really amazing experience.
Yeah, so New York Islanders played in Nassau at that point. I was actually lucky to visit there this year, and it was really cool old hockey atmosphere there. And
absolutely, that arena has a lot of history to it, and obviously that's where they won their Stanley Cups and all that. So, and it gets very loud too. So that was a very fun experience for sure.
You even scored once. You have one NHL goal.
It was a dream to just be up there and play against those guys, and to be lucky enough to score a goal was even more amazing for sure.
What kind of goal was it?
It wasn't that pretty, but it went in. It was kind of a backhand that snuck in, and they had to do video review on it. So I even had to stand there and sweat and hope it was goal. And finally, the ref said good goal. So it was definitely a little nerve-wracking.
Okay, you still got the puck?
Yeah, I did. I do have the puck.
Where do you keep it?
My mom and dad has it at home in a kind of a painting, the first game and the first goal. So they keep that.
Perfect. So then after 3 years you came back to Sweden and in Färjestad, was it?
Yeah, exactly.
Like Vienna. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was
Right.
right.
Yes, right.
Yeah, it felt like I had done enough time over there, and I was ready to bring my wife with me back and come to Sweden.
Yeah.
Yeah, we decided to go to Färjestad, and
Okay.
I had 2 really good years there. It was a lot of fun to play there.
Okay.
Great team and organization. So.
Okay. Is your wife Swedish or American?
No, my wife is American.
Okay.
So it was her first time moving to Sweden, but she had been a couple of times before that,
Yes.
and she really liked it.
What do you think she's gonna like Lappeenranta and Finland?
I think she's gonna like it. She's already told me to take some pictures and some videos, and I definitely think she'll like it.
Okay. And after Färjestad you went back to Mora?
Yeah, they went up to the SHL. They
Yes.
played for that and got the spot. So they yeah, as soon as they went up, it felt kind of like a sign. My deal with Färjestad was up, so it felt natural to go back to Mora.
What kind of role you had in the team?
In Mora,
Yes.
the player I want to be,
Okay.
playing a lot of minutes and being a power forward, and
Yes.
yeah, and that was pretty much my role.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned it yourself. I can describe you as a power forward. I've checked some videos. You are not afraid to drop your gloves either. I've seen it also.
That was a long time ago, but
Okay.
yeah.
Tell me more about your style of playing hockey.
Yeah, I would say I'm a power forward, but I also like to keep the puck and control the puck. I like to shoot a lot, and I also don't mind getting physical, for sure.
Okay. What are your biggest strengths as a hockey player?
My biggest strengths are probably my shot.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I have a good shot at least.
Slap or wrist?
Wrist shot.
Okay.
Very rarely shoot a slap shot, but yeah, I'd say my shot and my being strong on the puck.
Okay. So, what about the weaknesses? Do you have any?
Yeah, I am a pretty big guy, so I'm not the fastest skater out there. And maybe it doesn't look like I'm going super fast, but it's going pretty fast at least.
Okay.
So I'd say my skating maybe.
Okay. You're still 27 at the best age as a hockey player. Do you still have some goals for your career? Are you planning to go back to NHL maybe one day? Or
Yeah, I
just a
mean,
dream?
I think every guy's dream is to be in the NHL or to get there, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, now I'm here and I'm excited for that and ready for this year to take this year first. But
Yes.
Obviously, the long-term dream is to go to the NHL. Yeah, for sure.
What do you know about SaiPa so far?
I don't know too much, but I've been to the rink and I've seen that. I've obviously looked them up a little bit and their history and that stuff. So yeah, a little bit at least.
Yeah. So now you had a couple of days to explore the city, and you've been pretty lucky with the weather. But what are your first impressions about Lappeenranta?
I like it absolutely. It's actually bigger than I thought, and yeah, like you said, having the sun out and the summer being here, it's definitely makes it look really nice.
Okay. How are you going to spend your summer now when you're leaving tomorrow? You're gonna come back on August. Yeah, training.
Yeah. No, I'm just gonna go to the States and work out there. Go back see my wife's parents.
Oh yeah.
And spend some time there, and get ready for the season.
Yeah. Perfect. If you can choose one, which is the most memorable moment in your career so far?
So far, it's gonna have to be when I got called up to the NHL and I got to play my first game. It was against Tampa Bay away, and they called me in the morning. I was actually practicing and I had to rush there, and I got there really late. I missed warm-ups and everything, and I just went out for the anthem. But that feeling when I was standing there was definitely the highlight of my career so far.
Was it a total surprise at that point, or?
Yeah, it was a big surprise in the morning. I had no idea, and then they told me, and also the rush of not knowing if I was going to make it on time.
Yeah.
And then finally standing there and realizing that your dream came true and that you are going to play your first NHL game, that was definitely very special.
Must be perfect. So how was the driving around city?
It was good.
It was good.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was good.
You're gonna have one of these when you come back, so.
Yeah, that's perfect. They drive nice. I like how easy the steering wheel is actually.
Yeah.
It's here, right?
Yes, it's here. And last, do you have any greetings for the fans of SaiPa?
Well, I definitely
look at the camera and say.
I definitely hope you guys show up at all the home games and cheer us on, and hopefully we're gonna have a really good year.
We're gonna have a really good year.
Thanks a lot, Johnny.
Thank
you very much. Thank you.